The last enslaved people were freed in Galveston, Texas in 1865.
The Emancipation Proclamation was actually done in 1863, but the last group of people didn't know until 2 years later.
There was about 250,000 slaves that were still not free and still living under slavery.
Where slaves were free and didn't find out until years later. It's like salt on a wound, because you're processing the fact that it was hidden. You're processing the fact that what that date even means.
A full 2 years later is when slaves in, I think it was Texas, finally, this is why Juneteenth is a thing.
Given the fact that slavery was such a huge moneymaker, it's not surprising that people wanted to kind of keep that under wraps.
Again, you have that moment in time when signing into the law is also very significant, but the bigger moment is that freedom for everybody.
Something was done, and then something was actually completed.
When I first heard about Juneteenth, I just was like, why didn't I? Why didn't I know about this?
I wasn't made aware of what Juneteenth was personally till I was about mid-20s or so.
It was not something that we learned about in school. They weren't going outside of the box to teach you anything that was different than was like right in the books.
Outside of the black race, I think the assumption is made that you know. I think the assumption is even made within our race that you do know or you should know.
I didn't even know that in Texas, it's like they do a whole thing.
Right.
You know what I mean? They do a whole parade, similar to what we do for the 4th of July.
Right.
It is still wild to me that it's like I just learned myself as a black person about Juneteenth. Juneteenth being about how long basically it took the word of freedom to get all the way to the last state. And then on a bigger scale, how long it took a child of the 90s to understand what that was all that long. It's like just the delaying of information.
The narratives that they're learning in schools are keeping a lot of truth out of it, or they're painting certain pictures where it's really deception.
All these years later, that I wasn't aware of the truth for our people, for our race. Yeah, it was like, wow, really?
I was placed in private schools as a youngin'. I'm like one of 3 black kids in the whole school. Faculty, staff, I don't know how they feel about me because I don't know my history.
You have to know where you were in order to know where you're going. What still worries me is the fact that there are people who still don't want to accept this history.
There's groups of people, rightly so, that want to include that in the education, but then there are groups of people who want to pull books and stuff off the library shelves. So how do we learn? How do we teach?
It's truth. It's a very ugly and brutal truth. But again, black people that's not the end of our contribution to this country.
Right.
The animated cartoons of the slavery, and it was always the whites and how they bossed us around and how they use chains and types of chambers, and it's kind of how they've put it in my ears when I was in school.
When I look back at my time in high school, I definitely wish I even had the mind at that age to ask, okay, so what else?
Kind of want to move on to the next topic, what else happened? What else was slavery about?
You should want to know the whole truth.
Yeah.
The entire history. We're all connected. We're all interconnected. We're not we try to segment it, but we're not.
There's a lot of people in a lot of different ways who are still not free and still enslaved. We could talk about the jail system and things like that. So there's a lot of progress that still is to be made.
It might come at a cost of some things that are ugly, not really great to talk about, but I think we need to be okay with celebrating the progression.
It seems to me if we're talking about the freedom of slaves, that is something that I believe that should be celebrated within all cultures in the United States of America, because it's a symbolization of people being free from oppression.
As I started to kind of unravel this history and learn more about who we are, I really started to feel proud, actually.
What the black race has contributed to American history is a lot. And it's beyond, like you said, Jordan, it's beyond slavery.
Juneteenth to me is a great reminder to be a critical thinker. The truth will come forth, but if nobody's looking for it, it's just gonna sit there.
One thing I really want to celebrate is our freedom. black and white people get to sit together now and not always having separated as much.
I mean, these are all things that are part of us being believers, right? Going back to the fact that it's really freedom. We need empathy, we need compassion, we need to be willing to hear and be educated.
So hard to talk about Juneteenth though without going through that whole
You got to go through a whole
spider
maze.
web.
Bringing awareness within the church, I think, would help bring a lot of healing, and we could really pave the way and be the example.
Church's role is simply to be aware, knowledgeable, celebrate with us, quite like we're doing now. Happy Juneteenth.